The BTK Killer. On January 15, 1974, four members of the Otero family were found murdered in their Wichita, Kansas home. Joseph, Julie, and two of their children had been bound, tortured, and killed. The brutality was unlike anything investigators had seen. But what made this case truly terrifying was what came next. For over 3 decades, a killer taunted police with letters signed BTK, bind, torture, kill. Between 1974 and 1991, he claimed 10 victims. Then, he went silent. During those years of terror and the silent years that followed, Dennis Rader was living what appeared to be an exemplary life. He was a married father of 2, an active member of his Lutheran church, and served as a Cub Scout leader. By day, he worked as a compliance officer, ensuring his neighbors followed city ordinances. He was the guy who'd knock on your door if your grass was too long. In 2004, after 13 years of silence, BTK started communicating again. His ego had grown too large. He sent a floppy disk to a local news station, asking police if they could trace it. They told him no, they couldn't. He believed them. It was a lie. The metadata on that disk led directly to Dennis Rader and his church computer. When police arrested him in February 2005, his daughter said the hardest part wasn't that her father was a monster, it was that he was so good at pretending to be normal. His wife had no idea. His children had no idea. His community was shocked. The man who enforced the rules had been breaking the most fundamental ones all along. The Killer Clown. On December 11, 1978, police obtained a search warrant for the home of John Wayne Gacy in Chicago. What they discovered beneath his house would become one of the most horrific crime scenes in American history. The crawl space contained the remains of 29 young men and boys. But just hours before that search warrant was executed, Gacy had been at a local pharmacy, chatting with employees, buying gifts for his wife. He was known, liked, trusted. Gacy wasn't just any member of his community. He was a pillar of it. He managed 3 KFC restaurants, organized elaborate street parties for his neighborhood where he'd dress as Pogo the Clown to entertain children. He met First Lady Rosalind Carter and had his photo taken with her. He was active in local Democratic politics. When young men in the area went missing, nobody suspected the friendly businessman who threw the best block parties. The facade began to crack when 15-year-old Robert Peast disappeared after telling his mother he was going to talk to a contractor about a summer job. That contractor was Gacy. Police had interviewed Gacy before about missing young men, but he'd always had explanations. He was a respectable businessman. This time, they dug deeper, literally. When confronted with the evidence, Gacy's mask finally fell. He confessed to 33 murders. His neighbors couldn't comprehend it. The man who made them laugh, who employed local teenagers, who seemed so normal, had been killing young men and burying them beneath the home where he hosted parties. Some of those victims had been buried while Gacy's wife was living in the house, and she never knew. The Golden State Killer. On April 24, 2018, police arrested a 72-year-old man outside his home in suburban Sacramento. His neighbors described him as a grumpy old man who yelled at people to stay off his lawn. They had no idea they'd been living next to one of California's most prolific serial killers and rapists for decades. Joseph DeAngelo's crime spree spanned from 1975 to 1986. He committed at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries across California. He was known by different names as he terrorized different areas: the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, the Original Night Stalker, and eventually the Golden State Killer. What made DeAngelo particularly terrifying was his methodology. He'd break into homes in the middle of the night, wake couples at gunpoint, bind them, and assault them. He'd eat their food, steal random items, and sometimes call victims months or years later to taunt them. He seemed to know everything about his victims, their schedules, their lives. Here's the twist that makes this case even more chilling. During some of those attacks, Joseph DeAngelo was a police officer. He worked for the Exeter Police Department and later the Auburn Police Department. He was fired from Auburn in 1979 for shoplifting, but by then he'd already committed dozens of crimes. He was literally investigating break-ins by day while committing them by night. After 1986, he stopped completely. He got married, had 3 daughters, worked as a mechanic, and became a grandfather. For 32 years, he lived a quiet suburban life. His family had no idea. His coworkers had no idea. What finally caught him? A DNA match through a genealogy website. Investigators uploaded crime scene DNA to a public genealogy database, found distant relatives, and used that to build a family tree that led to DeAngelo. When police surveilled him and collected his DNA from a discarded item, it was a perfect match. The technology that people used to find their ancestors had caught a monster hiding in plain sight for over 4 decades. The Green River Killer. On November 30th, 2001, detectives arrested a 52-year-old truck painter named Gary Ridgway. He lived in a modest home near Seattle with his third wife, attended church regularly, and was described by co-workers as quiet and dependable. He'd worked at the same Kenworth truck factory for over 3 decades. He was also the Green River Killer, responsible for at least 49 confirmed murders, though he claimed the real number was closer to 80. He'd been killing women, primarily sex workers, since 1982, dumping their bodies in and around the Green River in Washington state. What's disturbing about Ridgway wasn't just the number of victims, it was how extraordinarily ordinary he seemed. He wasn't charming like Ted Bundy. He wasn't outwardly creepy. He was just unremarkable. He'd go to work, paint trucks, come home to his wife, and attend church on Sundays. His wife would later say she never suspected anything. Ridgway had actually been interviewed by police in 1983, early in their investigation. He'd even passed a polygraph test. He was on their radar for nearly 2 decades, but he was so normal, so bland, that he kept slipping through. Here's what finally caught him. He couldn't stop himself from revisiting the dump sites. In 1987, police had collected DNA samples from several suspects, including Ridgway, but DNA technology wasn't advanced enough yet to use it. For 14 years, that evidence sat waiting. In 2001, advances in DNA testing allowed investigators to retest the samples. Gary Ridgway's DNA matched semen found on several victims. When confronted, he confessed to spare himself the death penalty. He described his crimes with chilling matter-of-factness, explaining that he targeted sex workers because he thought I could kill as many as I wanted without getting caught. For nearly 20 years, he was right. He was the guy you'd see at the grocery store, at the gas station, painting trucks at the factory, and no one had any idea he was one of America's most prolific serial killers. The Kindly Killer. On February 8, 1983, a plumber was called to investigate blocked drains at a London apartment building. When he opened the manhole cover, he found the source of the blockage: human flesh and bones. The remains belonged to residents of the building, specifically to the victims of Dennis Nilsen, a civil servant who lived in the top-floor apartment. Nilsen had murdered at least 12 young men and boys between 1978 and 1983. His method was particularly insidious. He'd meet vulnerable young men, often homeless or drifters, at bars or on the street. He'd invite them back to his flat for food, drinks, and a place to stay. Then, once they were asleep or passed out, he'd strangle or drown them. But here's what makes Nilsen's case particularly unsettling. By day, he was a well-respected civil servant working at a job center, helping unemployed people find work. He was known as kind, thoughtful, and soft-spoken. He was a union representative, advocating for workers' rights. His co-workers liked him. He was good at his job. By night, he was murdering the exact type of vulnerable young men he was supposed to be helping professionally. Many of his victims were unemployed, homeless, or struggling, people who might have even come through his job center. After killing them, Nilsen would keep the bodies in his apartment for weeks or months. He'd sit with them, talk to them, even bathe and dress them. When the bodies began to decompose, he'd dismember them and dispose of the remains. At his first residence, he burned them in bonfires in the garden. When he moved to an apartment, he tried flushing them down the toilet. That's what clogged the drains. What's chilling is that Nilsen almost wasn't caught at all. When police arrived and found evidence throughout his apartment, including body parts in plastic bags, Nilsen calmly asked, "Are we talking about 1 body or 2?" When told it was at least 2, he responded, "Good grief, how awful. It's nearer 15 or 16. The man who helped unemployed people by day had been killing them by night. The kind civil servant was one of Britain's most prolific serial killers, and nobody suspected a thing. The Charming Monster. On February 15, 1978, a university student in Tallahassee, Florida, survived a brutal attack in her sorority house. She described her attacker as clean-cut and handsome. Hours earlier, that same man had murdered 2 of her sorority sisters and attacked 2 others in the same building. His name was Ted Bundy. But here's what made Bundy different from almost every other serial killer. He didn't just hide in plain sight, he thrived in it. He was handsome, charismatic, educated, and charming. He was a law student, a crisis hotline volunteer, and worked on political campaigns. He was the guy parents hoped their daughters would date. In 1974, when women began disappearing around the University of Washington, one of the people helping search for them was a young psychology student named Ted Bundy. He was volunteering at a suicide crisis hotline, literally saving lives while taking others. His girlfriend and her young daughter had no idea. His friends, many of whom were in law enforcement, had no idea. When composite sketches were released showing a handsome man with dark hair driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle, multiple people called in tips about Ted Bundy. But he was so likable, so normal, that even some of the police who interviewed him thought there must be some mistake. This clean-cut young man couldn't be a killer. Bundy confessed to 30 murders across 7 states between 1974 and 1978, though the actual number is likely much higher. He was good-looking enough to be disarming, smart enough to manipulate, and charming enough that people wanted to trust him. He used those gifts to kill. What finally caught him? A traffic stop. On August 16, 1975, a highway patrolman pulled Bundy over for a minor traffic violation. In his car were handcuffs, a crowbar, rope, and an ice pick. That stop led to his arrest, but even then he charmed his way through, representing himself in court, escaping from jail twice, and continuing to kill until his final capture. Even after his conviction, people struggled to reconcile the charming man they saw on TV with the monster he truly was. That was his greatest weapon. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like someone you'd want to know, and that's exactly what made him so dangerous. If you'd like to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.